these final days of Advent as Christmas is approaching, school children are getting more and more excited about the events that are unfolding. And let me tell you about one classroom in one little school where the religion teacher looked at all the children in the classroom and asked them a simple question: where's God? She looked in particular at one little lad in the front row and she said again, "Where's God?" Well, this lad became very defensive and he shouted back, "I don't know, I don't know." She scolded him for his defensiveness, and that night when he went home to his mother, he was crying, and he's crying to his mother, "Teacher's lost God, and she's blaming me." In a sense, we live in a world that has lost God or is losing God. We live in a world where there's, even amidst the preparations for Christmas, there's a growing secularity where the absence of God seems to be more profound than the presence of God. So on this fourth Sunday of Advent, I'd like us to reflect a little bit on this contrast between the absence of God and the presence of God. We look around the world and there are other signs of God's absence. I even had one very pious old aunt who lived well into her 90s, and she was as deaf as a doornail and blind as a bat. And she used to say, "I think he's half deafer than I am," referring to God. "I think he's forgotten all about me." So even people who believe in God sometimes have the sense that he's absent from their day-to-day lives, that he's a distant God. The whole message of Advent is that our God is neither absent nor distant. Our God is close and he's present. There are some signposts in Advent that point to God's return, to the imminence of his real presence in our midst. And what are the signposts of Advent? In a very real way, the most important signpost of all is the sign of the Virgin bearing child. The Blessed Virgin Mary is the great Advent signpost. She's like a bell ringing and chiming in the life of the world. The bell that signifies the return of God. Now, if we look at the readings for this fourth Sunday of Advent, we see the figure of Mary emerging in that long journey that she made while pregnant. She made a journey from Nazareth to the village of Ein Karim outside Jerusalem. That was a journey of about 70 miles. Took several days for her to do it when she went to the home of her cousin Elizabeth, whom the angel had told Mary was also with child. And the event that is going to occur in the home of Elizabeth after Mary's long journey there from Nazareth is the event that we call the Visitation. And in the Gospel for the fourth Sunday of Advent, we have that Visitation event depicted. And it's an event all about the living presence of God in the world, and Mary, the signpost of God's return, carrying that living presence. If there's one message that Mary communicates, and that this gospel scene of the Visitation communicates, it's the Advent message that God will never again be hidden, that God will never again allow the world to think he's absent, The Advent message is once and for all, God is ever present and ever visible. The question is, how do we respond to the presence and visibility of God in our midst? Well, let's look at that Advent scene in McCurry, where Elizabeth, in response to God being present within Mary, Elizabeth couldn't see the baby inside Mary's womb, but an extraordinary moment occurred when the baby in Elizabeth's womb, the unborn John the Baptist, leaped for joy. He jumped for joy at the presence of God in their home. Mary brought the presence of Jesus in her womb to the home of Elizabeth, and it was these two unborn infants still in the wombs of their mothers, these two unborn infants that rejoiced together in God's presence among us. A very important moment in appreciating the life of the unborn. In the writings of the early fathers of the church, this moment where John the Baptist jumps for joy at the presence of God, at the saving work of Jesus Christ, though he and Jesus are still unborn, the fathers of the church say that that's the moment where John the Baptist was sanctified in the womb of his mother. And that's why in the scriptures we hear there's no man born of woman greater than John the Baptist, because he was the first beneficiary, the first recipient of the saving power of Jesus Christ in the world, Jesus being brought into the life of John through the mediation of Jesus' mother Mary and John's mother Elizabeth. So what response do we, like John and like Elizabeth, make to the presence of Jesus Christ in our midst? The story is told of the parish priest who got wind that Jesus Christ was going to be walking down the high street in town momentarily. So he quickly phoned the Pope and said, "What am I to do? What am I to do? I just heard Jesus is coming down the high street." And the Pope said, "Look busy." We have to do more than simply look busy. We have to be attentive. We have to be attentive to the presence of God in our midst. And that was the great gift of John the Baptist. That was the great gift of Elizabeth. Not only in the house at McCurry, John the Baptist, as he grew up, was constantly attentive to the presence of the Lord. John the Baptist has the title, the forerunner of the Lord, or the precursor of the Lord, or the herald of the Lord, or the voice of the Lord. And years later, when Jesus would begin his public ministry, it was his cousin John the Baptist who would identify Jesus and say, "Behold the Lamb of God." Now in today's readings, we have a reference to God as Lamb, God as Shepherd. Jesus is coming in our midst both as the Lamb, the gentle, innocent Lamb, and the Shepherd, the new Shepherd of Israel, the new Shepherd of the church. John the Baptist was well prepared to recognize Jesus both as Lamb and as Shepherd, because John the Baptist, like Jesus, came to live in a culture of shepherds. Most likely, John's family were sheep farmers. McCurry is about 5 miles outside of Jerusalem, and there are fields where the sheep still graze to this very day. So John understood what a lamb was, and lambs eventually come to be offered in sacrifice, and what a shepherd has to do. So Jesus comes then into the world as really present, as an innocent lamb who will eventually become shepherd. As children, we all learned the little nursery rhyme. You remember it? Mary had a little lamb. Well, I learned a different version probably than you did. My version went like this. Mary had a little lamb. Its foot was black as soot, and into Mary's jar of jam its sooty foot it put. Well, the Blessed Virgin Mary carried and bore and birthed a little lamb. And her little lamb, Jesus, did not disdain getting his foot sooty. His feet and hands crawled in the muck of this world. And because he got mucky, we got lucky. The luck, the grace of being saved, the blessing of salvation. But we wouldn't have the luck of being saved, the blessing of salvation, if Jesus Christ had not become real man, walking amidst the dirt and grime of this world, getting his hands and feet sooty and mucky. That's what happens to lambs and to shepherds. Once again, we're focusing this fourth Sunday of Advent then on the reality of God in our midst. In these final days of Advent, the Church prays what we call the O antiphons. Every day for the last 7 days of Advent, there are special prayers that are said invoking a different title of Jesus with the phrase, O wisdom, O key of David, O Holy One of Israel. And today, the title that we invoke is O Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is the Hebrew term that means God with us. God's present, not absent. God's visible, not invisible. God's real, not fake. And so on this fourth Sunday of Advent, we stand gobsmacked at the presence, the visibility, the reality of Emmanuel, God among us. May we all respond to his presence among us with attentiveness, preparedness, vigilance, and love.